Harpers. They were here last year, but you didn't have the whole Oscar experience, did you? Of course, Nomadland, Oscar award-winning movie that the book was turned into.
They had a 170-person attendance cap on the Oscars, so I did come out, but it was mostly to get Linda May and Swanky ready. These are two of the people I followed for, gosh, at least 3 years. That's a diplomatic way of saying I stalked them as only a journalist can. And getting them ready and putting them in the limo was like sending my elders off to the prom. It was one of the coolest experiences I have ever had.
Everyone saw it, I assume? Yes? So let's go back to the beginning, when you were first writing this story for Harper's, right? That then turned into the book, that then turned into the movie. Why immersion journalism? You have a sweet place in Brooklyn, has air condition and creature comforts. Why go into the field like that?
Well, I've done a lot of work in more traditional areas. I've done daily newspapers, I've done weekly newspapers, I've done blogs. I've written from the county in Oregon that had probably the most meth crime in the state. I've done all sorts of other stuff like that. My dream was always to go a little deeper. You and I sitting here, we're going to have this great conversation, right? But I'm a little weird, and it might not come out here. They're not going to see things you would see if you came back to Brooklyn with me, if we had coffee, if you hung out with me when a 20-year-old was trying to teach me how to skateboard, which is really happening. A midlife crisis, I don't know. But for me, I like to think back to one of my mentors. His name is Ted Conover, and he is a great immersion person to the point where he was undercover for an entire year as a jail guard at Sing Sing, which is a really messed up milieu to work in for a lot of reasons. Mass incarceration, big problem. So when I first started talking to Ted about this kind of work, he told me that for him, a lot of regular journalism felt like being on a cruise ship in this really loud Jimmy Buffett-ish Hawaiian shirt. And when you pull into port, you get off the cruise ship, and the people who live there press pause. And they act out whatever drama they think you expect, and they show you this story that they'd like you to see for several hours. You get back on the boat, and they continue going about their actual lives, their beautiful, complicated, messy, deeply, very human lives. And I don't like Hawaiian shirts. And I wanted to see if I could go deeper. I just thought that you only get so much by parachuting in. And I'd done enough parachuting in my career to know that and to feel that I was ready to do something a bit harder.
What's the difference between undercover journalism and immersion journalism?
Sure. Undercover journalism, a lot of people think is very sexy. And the truth is, it's not. It's horrible. I've done only a little bit. So most of Nomadland is immersion, but not undercover. When I say immersion, I say I'm living really close with people. When I'm in the van, that van is Halen. These are some pictures from my travels. Halen and I are kicking it in the Badlands over here, a very beautiful area of the country.
Okay, the most important question is, why not Morrison?
Why not Morrison?
Next van?
Too many syllables. I need to be able to shout at Halen when Halen eats his fourth alternator.
Ooh.
Halen has more of a,
Oomph.
than Morrison. Too much.
Okay.
Too much.
All right. Fair.
And then it would become like Tuesdays or Thursdays with Maury or something, just too complicated. But when I'm out in the van, it's different. I'm there night and day. And I think I lost a bit of the thread because you got me so excited talking about my van, which I could do forever. But yeah, when we're out there.
But you were only undercover for like the beats.
Thank you. Yeah, so I did go undercover for places where I couldn't actually follow my sources. So my preference would be to follow people, to follow Linda May. I think one of the pictures you'll see is actually taken while I'm in my running shoes, jogging after Linda May's golf cart, because I couldn't ride in it because she might get fired. It's not company policy, but what I could do was jog after it, take pictures, observe, have my pad out, and of course, if Linda said microlitter and pointed to the ground, I would pick up the gum wrappers for Linda. So that's actually my preferred mode of being, is watching. And when I'm watching, everybody knows what I'm about. I look ridiculous. I've got my camera, I've got my pad, and I'm jogging. No one wants to see that. When I'm undercover, which is rarer, it's because there's something I don't think I can get by just walking in and hanging out and not leaving. So for example, I went undercover at Amazon's Camper Force program, which brings in mostly older full-time RVers, most of whom can't afford to have a traditional retirement. And I went in there because that's a closed work site. If I walked up to the front door and said, "May I come in and observe your workers?" they would laugh. Same thing with the sugar beet harvest. That's the sort of thing where it's a closed work site. It's a factory environment. You can't go in past the guard shack without your laminate. And I wanted to see up close what was actually happening, because while a lot of people were telling me about injuries and about the hard work, there were other people who had internalized this very almost too much can-do, almost toxically positive attitude, which is, oh, those people are just whiners and complainers, you just suck it up and you do it. And while I doubted that was true, I really felt like I needed to see for myself.
There's this dichotomy, right? This perception of super cool people who have cool vans named Halen, for instance, who are enjoying the freedoms of retirement, versus this idea that people are essentially homeless. What was the perception when you first descended, I suppose, sans Hawaiian shirt, but with a Columbia J School backpack, so very clear that you were a journalist? What was their reaction to you?
Well, the funny thing is, the first time I went out there for the Harper story you mentioned, I didn't have a van yet. I had a really sad kind of Girl Scouts tent and a rental car. And I accidentally slotted into people's preconceptions of what it meant to not even have a vehicle for shelter. I told everybody what I was doing, that I was a journalist, that in a few weeks I'd be going back to New York, but at the same time, they saw me tent camping in the middle of the desert, in the cold. Harper's had offered me maybe 2 nights at a hotel, and I said, I'm not gonna get anything real if I do that. So I just took the tent, went out there. They thought it was hilarious and that they needed to take care of me a little bit because clearly I didn't know what I was doing or I wouldn't be in a tent.
In terms of very cold.
I was really cold. I had done a lot of summer desert camping and kind of thought that the skills would transfer, but the high desert at night is not so hot in both ways.
But they were a little skeptical?
Yeah, so some people were skeptical. I do remember a woman named Lavon, who became Linda's best friend. I walked up to this table where she was holding brunch, and I showed up with eggs, and of course they already had about 2 dozen boxes of that. They could have used orange juice. I blew it. And Lavon said, "Oh, I've heard about you. You are the journalist, and you are going to make us out to be a bunch of homeless vagabonds." And I said a very small piece about that. That's not what I'm about. I'm here to learn. And then I just backed off because I don't do that sort of confrontation, particularly in the field, particularly in front of a whole bunch of hungry brunch people. And 3 days later, when I hadn't left, not leaving is my specialty, Lavon started telling me about her experiences.
And as she told you more about her experiences and as the rest opened up to you in really vulnerable ways, what surprised you most about this subculture? You obviously did a lot of research before you immersed yourself there, but what stood out to you?
Sure, when I emerged into immersion,
exactly.
It was interesting to me just to see the different layers of the story. You talked a little bit about the difference between this free choice, freewheeling idea of retirement, and then this idea of utter destitution. But you and I both know that the reality is always much more complicated than that. So for many of the people I spoke with, the first thing they would tell me is, I am out here having a wonderful adventure. And they would tell me stories that completely supported that interpretation. And then 3 days later, I would hear about the medical debt. I would hear about the house that was completely underwater that somebody had walked away from. I would hear about the student debt. I would hear about the credit card bills. I would hear about getting wiped out in 2008. I would hear about all these catastrophes, about really never having enough, about people who felt like these kind of psychotic hamsters on little wheels their entire lives because wages were flat and the cost of shelter kept going up. And it just seemed like there was no way to get ahead, and people expected to do that until their last days. At the time I was doing this reporting, AARP put out a study saying that more people feared running out of money than actually dying. But the interesting thing is, for the people I met, the stories they were telling me were consistent. Maybe Henry could have gone and crashed on his uncle's couch and didn't want to feel like a burden to his uncle and chose to be out in the van. And for Henry, that's a really important distinction. So when we think about choice, it's really important to think about the wide range of choices. Last thing on this is I still think back to a soup kitchen I went to visit when I was in the town of Quartzsite, Arizona, which is really like a pop-up city of seniors in the winter when it's cold. And I went and I spoke with a pastor who was running this place. And I said, what's going on here? Why does everybody come to your town, this town of Quartzsite? And he said, well, Quartzsite is a great place to hide. And I'm thinking, first of all, this is wide open, expansive desert. Are you going to hide behind a saguaro cactus? What do you mean? And then these people are not on the lam. They're not hiding from the law. What are you talking about? This doesn't make any sense that it's a great place to hide. And he told me, no, they're hiding from their kids. They want their kids to think that they are A-okay, that they're living this postcard dream, when in reality, a lot of them are, just one broken axle away from capital H homelessness. He told me the story of an older gentleman in a situation like that who had been found dead in his RV parked out in a gravel terrace just miles from where we were having the conversation.
And what were some of the financial issues, if you could draw a trend line or through line to the stories you heard? Was it loss of job, recession, divorce? Was there something consistent there? And then beyond the axle or RV problems, were there financial issues or pain points that you found consistent in the folks you met?
Sure. I mean, it was really a grab bag of problems. Obviously, tons of consumer debt. We mentioned medical debt, just unforeseen circumstances. We know how few Americans have enough put away for even a minor emergency to strike and to be able to cover it. So a lot of people had just been standing on the edge when something swept them off. I mean, I think about this during COVID, how we've seen so many problems get exacerbated. We had so many people who were really right on the edge, and all it would take was a puff of wind, and instead we got a tornado. So a lot of these people had dealt with emergencies, but many of them, even before the emergencies happened, had been worn down by some of the forces we talked about. The fact that wages had been flat or stagnant for such a long time, they had not kept up with productivity. The cost of shelter kept going up and up and up. Retirement finance for a lot of people was a big challenge. If you look after the New Deal, the whole way it was supposed to be work was on a model that they referred to as the three-legged stool, where one of those legs was savings, another was your 401k, and the third was Social Security. And I'm sorry, not 401k, it was a pension. So pension, Social Security, savings. Well, if you look at 2008, many people had their savings knocked out. That's one leg sawed off the stool. If you look at the pension leg, who gets a pension these days? Pension, when I think about it, it sounds like an abacus. It's like this thing that we hear people once had, and where did it go?
BlackBerry.
Yeah, a BlackBerry. A Palm Pilot. I had a Palm Pilot. I don't know how my fingers were ever so small. But yeah, if you look at that and the fact that it changed to 401ks in the 80s, they were marketed as this instrument of financial freedom, but they really transfer the risk to the workers, right? And then you look at Social Security, which was never meant to be enough to live on. It was always intended to be a supplement. So people like to joke, and it is a sad joke, that three-legged stool essentially became a pogo stick. And I can't pogo. I don't know about you, but I don't think most people can.
You're not learning to pogo in your midlife crisis?
No, just skateboard. That's 4 wheels.
Gotcha.
And I'm not trying to get off the ground.
And how were they making money to pay for the basics, food, an extra axle, or whatever else?
Yeah, a lot of the people I met were doing 2 things. One was they had just shaved their overhead as low as possible. So when you think about life on the road, you're not going to be paying, obviously, the rent, the mortgage, the utilities, the same. We used to say the last free place in America is a parking spot. So people cut their overhead down and try to go financially dormant Some things, for example, like solar panels that used to be very expensive, the prices come down and people can now use them to be, portable power generation stations and kind of their own self-contained units. Another thing that I learned about was this whole shadow economy of a particular sort of itinerant job. So this was Amazon's camper force that had people come and pick and pack in the warehouses all over the country in those crazy weeks leading up to the Christmas holiday. This was also working at tourist traps from Dollywood to Waldrug. You could work at like a fish hatchery. You could sell 4th of July fireworks, and then you could sell pine trees when Christmas came around. So there's this whole rotating labor circuit, and a lot of people I met were just kind of driving that loop around the country.
Was there vitriol aimed at a particular branch of government, at employers, at the healthcare system? Was there a particular disdain toward the system that you found in common?
Disdain almost implies a level of bitterness I didn't see. The people I met were not angry. Some of them were tired, but not angry. A lot of them had just thrown up their hands. They didn't think that the cavalry was coming. They didn't really see government as something that would be particularly useful or relevant to their lives. They saw it as a force that they often had to kind of work around. For example, everybody needs a mailing address just to have a driver's license, to vote, to get your insurance. So a lot of people I met had these fake addresses or used mail forwarding. So the government, for them, felt like something that is kind of in your business and you have to work around and isn't really going to be useful. So not anger, but frustration, or just some of them seemed almost post-political.
Or disappointment? You mentioned medical debt being one of the major issues. Disappointment at the healthcare system?
Yes and no. I just think most of the people I met didn't want to live in that space of daily disappointment. And while there might have been some disappointment, they were trying to essentially walk themselves into new stories, because nobody wants to be a victim in his or her own life, right? Everybody wants to get up and keep on going, and sometimes it's the stories we tell ourselves that enable that to happen.
You were on the road searching for your main character, first in the article and then in the book. How long did it take you to find her?
Well, I kind of found her by mistake, as often the best things happen. I thought I was writing about somebody when I was pitching Harper's, and then I couldn't write about that somebody. That somebody got hired full-time in a warehouse. I hadn't met anybody else who'd gone from camper force to full-time, and he told me that if I wrote about him, he would get what they called the Amazon cold shoulder, which meant he would show up with his badge and it wouldn't work anymore. And I thought that was pretty cold, so I wasn't going to write about him. But I had a job to do, and I was out in the desert, and another person I'd met in this RV park working at Amazon, who lived in a 12-foot trailer and had a talking parrot and stayed up late at night watching police procedurals, and then the parrot would scream to imitate the victims. It was a lot for a 12-foot space. But I would go to visit her at night because my tent was cold, and I would sit and watch TV with her. We call this productive hanging out. Sometimes you learn things, you become part of the furniture, which is good for reporting anyway. One night I showed up and Iris told me, I'm going to something called the Rubber Tramp Rendezvous tomorrow. Do you want to come? And I said, yes, I think I'd like to do that very much. So I followed her out there in my rental car. And that's where, after several days of talking to people, I met this incredible woman, Linda May, who actually pretty much feels like family now. That's something that hasn't really happened to me in shorter form reporting. But Linda had just gotten out on the road. She was trying to figure out how to live on around $500 a month. She had worked for Amazon. She was in an RV. And she also had a dream, which made her really compelling to write about. She had this dream of making enough money to build this off-grid homestead that she could take care of, but would also kind of take care of her in this organic way. And I said, if I can follow her pursuit of that, no matter what happens, I think it's going to be interesting. At that point, I did not know I would be following her for 3 years. If anybody had walked up to us in the desert that day and said, hey, you two, over there, you're talking to each other. Well, you're going to be in a magazine story, Linda. It's going to be on the cover. Then it's going to turn into a book and you're going to be the main character. Oh, and by the way, after that happens, you will star in a triple Oscar-winning movie alongside Frances McDormand. I think we would have asked what you were smoking. In fact, I still might.
When they saw the fruits of your immersion with the article and then the movie, what was their reaction then? Did they feel like you did right by them?
They did, which is a huge relief. Even when I'm immersing, one of the hard truths of this kind of work is my foremost responsibility is to the truth and to the reader. And, I have to get it right. But that doesn't mean that people are going to like what I say and what I see. I think we all have ways we like to see ourselves from the outside, and people interpret things very differently. So I didn't take for granted that they liked it. I do remember seeing Bob Wells, who's getting his hair cut in that picture, on YouTube doing a reading of the preface of the book for his many, many followers, and I thought, I've made it to the other side of this. I've got Bob's good housekeeping seal, and that felt really good. But it's not something I can really aim or plan for. But I did genuinely care about the people I met in this community, so frankly, it did come as a huge relief.
You focused a lot on women. Was that on purpose, by design, or is that just what happened?
Kind of by accident, but then it turned out to make a whole lot of sense. The first person who was going to get the Amazon cold shoulder, we feared, was male, and was the original main character for Harper's, could have followed into the book. But the more time I spent on the road, the more solo women I saw out there. And I remember calling my best friend, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Dale Maharaj, who rode the rails on freight trains with the dispossessed in the 80s and really only saw men out there. We were talking about what's different, what's going on. And the more I learned, the more I realized, of course, this is what's happening. Society is changing. A lot of these women have straddled different worlds. They're at an age where, when they were growing up, they were told that, they were at an age where one could survive on a one-income family, and did. And a single minimum wage earner could support a whole family and even lift a family out of poverty. So the model was, nuclear family. The woman is traditionally the housekeeper and the man is traditionally the breadwinner, and they were really socialized around that. So a lot of people, a lot of women, if they'd been in the workforce at all, had also taken a lot of time out of it because the unpaid labor of caregiving, whether it's for children or aging parents and others, typically falls on women's shoulders. So we have people with lower lifetime earnings. We have the gender pay gap. We have the fact that when it comes time to get Social Security, if you've worked fewer hours over the span of your life, you'll have lower earnings. And then the simple fact that women live a lot longer than men in many cases, and that this thing called divorce started getting pretty big. So a lot of people I met had been through and lived these entire long lives and had really not planned to be where they were, and many of them were figuring it out together, to the point where they even started a whole women's rubber tramp rendezvous that they do in addition to the full one. So seeing them adapting to the situation, showing incredible resilience that frankly they should not have to show to get by, to me was incredibly compelling. And I'm really glad it ended up the way it did, but it wasn't by design.
What's the rubber tramp rendezvous?
I'm so sorry. This is the problem with immersion. You get so far in that you forget to come out sometimes. The Rubber Tramp Rendezvous is an annual gathering of van dwellers and people who live on the road. For anyone who saw the film, it's that event led by Bob Wells, where everybody's sitting around the campfire. People are coming from all over. I met Linda May there. She went there to learn how to live on $500 a month and to meet other people who were doing similar things. They have seminars on everything from where to get cheap dental care in Los Algodones, Mexico, also known as the Molar City. 400 dentists, amazing place, great shrimp tacos. And I defy you to go there and not hear the Eagles playing, possibly even in the dental chair. So it was really just this amazing skill share that showed me that these people who are out on the road, while it looked very solitary, they weren't going it alone. They were forming a community. And if anything gave me hope about where we're headed, when I was looking at these incredibly dark financial inequities, it was them and their spirit. And I remember thinking, if these people, maybe in the last quarter of their lives, can completely upend how they're doing it and still find meaning and still find connection, why can't all of us think a little more radically and a little deeper?
Should we just end? I have one more question, but that was like a mic drop moment.
And now I run away.
Frances McDormand, amazing. How did she get involved as wanting this to be her next film, and really putting these issues to the forefront?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is a crazy story. Whenever people say, how are you going to do this again? I look at them and I think, are you crazy? I'm not going to do this again, and I'm okay with that. What happened was I was actually out here in the van on book tour, and I got a call from New York that said, there's somebody at UTA. And I said, what's a UTA? This was United Talent Agency, who wanted to talk to me about the book. Now, I have a lot of friends who write nonfiction, and many of them joke about the Hollywood ship threatening to dock and then steaming on by. It's like the opposite of the cruise ship we opened with. It just keeps going, never comes to shore. So I took this all with a huge grain of salt. And I remember going to meet this agent. She's got a dream job. She reads books and looks for things that might convert well to the screen. And she watched me parallel park the van in LA and didn't run away screaming. And I thought, that's a really good sign. And we talked about the story. And I thought she was wonderful. I did not expect much. I find that sometimes when your expectations are low, kind of only good things can happen. So her name was Jasmine. She ran off with it. She posted something internally. The partner of Frances's agent, Brian Swardstrom's partner, Peter, who also produced Call Me By Your Name, ended up reading it, handing it to Brian, and saying, I think this is Frances's next big project. And then from what I understand, everything happened really quickly. Whenever you're kind of involved in it, time dilates and slows down. It seems glacial. Apparently, Nomadland was made overnight in Hollywood time. So, tomorrow maybe there'll be another one. I don't know. Probably not. But yeah, it was really, I didn't even want to tell Linda or the people in the book that we'd been optioned until something might actually happen, because I'm already managing my hopes. And the last thing I wanted to do was, disappoint theirs.
Yes, on Wall Street and in life, it's better to beat low expectations and buy low, sell high. That's basically it. And then, and it sounds like Frances got a hold of it and really just became passionate and immersed, and it resonated with her.
Oh, she lived in it
instantaneously.
But by the time I actually met her out on the set, she'd been living in it for a couple of years, and just had told me that there were people she told when she was going into it, don't expect to hear from me. I'm kind of going to another place. So yeah, she lived it. It was kind of, I guess, the cinema equivalent of immersion for her, and that's something I respected a lot.
So we have a very exciting video to show. This brings us very nicely into groundbreaking research that the Financial Health Network recently released. Men are 1.5 times more likely to be financially healthy than women. I'm sure that doesn't surprise you. So we'd love to take a look at this video. Thank you.
Thank you,
Jessica.
Nicole.
See you down the road.
See you down the road.
See you down the road.
Thank you for coming.
So you know the game Chutes and Ladders? You climb the ladder to go up. Well, I've been on the slide down, 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 and I'm still going.
The financial health gap between men and women is growing in America.
They told us as teenagers, get your degree and you'll make a lot of money, but that's not really how it works.
I'm not sure how big bills are gonna get.
You almost don't even want to think about it because there's nothing you can do. When I started having kids, I had nobody to help me. I gave up my career, but I wish I didn't have to.
My financial regret is taking on credit card debt that I thought was going to build my credit.
Student loans are on pause right now, but I am still so stressed for when they come back.
Saving now is really hard. You've got to utilize whatever you have to make sure you stay afloat.
Women need equal wages they can live on. They need better benefits and safety nets. Women need affordable care for their families and a better way to save for the future. We can do better. Empowering women empowers us all.